think we're going to sing hymn 108 next. Is it?
Or do you go to the message?
Oh, okay, after, okay. I didn't want this to after, get sure. Yeah. We'll do the message. Got thrown off with what's going on over there. Okay. I will open my talk, Born Again Pagan, A Spiritual Journey, with a quote from Adrian Rich. It's exhilarating to be alive in a time of awakening consciousness. It can also be confusing and disorientating and painful. And from Carl Jung, 1949, I have always tried to remain unbiased and curious. At first impression, my title may sound a little reactionary. There is probably a little truth in that statement. However, the main implication of my title is an affirmation of my faith and path as a pagan. It contains the acknowledgement of the spiritual struggle, which involves the personal inner battle with my Christian roots and the external conflicts of living in a pagan, ignorant, intolerant Christian society that after all these years I'm at peace with. This external and internal struggle is one I share with many of my fellow pagan sisters and brothers. Feelings of alienation, discrimination, and even victimization are common experiences for us pagans, even in today's modern society. So this talk is about self-realization and self-affirmation as a pagan convert. Before I continue, I'll give a brief definition of pagan. The word's origin means country dweller. Today, pagan is a broad category encompassing earth and nature-centered pre-Christian indigenous religions of many continents and cultures, as well as modern expressions. The stigma associated with the term rises from the Middle Ages, where it came to mean anybody who wasn't Christian or of the true faith. Kind of like us UUs. So what a modern day stigma. What is it like being a pagan? While discrimination may be too strong to describe all pagan experiences, I propose that for many of us at the minimum, we have been misunderstood, excluded, or forgotten. For the fortunate few who were born into non-religious homes or raised in a more tolerant religious atmosphere, such as Unitarian Universalism, their paganism may at least be accepted, if not understood. However, for the rest, raised in traditional Christian homes and schools, alienation and discrimination is part of our experience. For us who have dared to believe and leave the fold of true believers and cross to the other side, the forbidden, the so-called land of the damned, of course, is not without its consequences. I believe that to remain free is not to submit to intolerance or to remain silent on who we are. So let's be clear that my purpose is not an assault against Christianity or to extol the virtues of paganism at the expense of Christianity. This would be contrary to who we are. Pagans, like Unitarian Universalists, do not have a need to proselytize. We are not under the obligation to convert others to our so-called true way. Unlike much of Christianity, we are not, one of my favorite terms, spiritual supremacists. My perspective may be analogous to getting out of a bad marriage. Sometimes people who have experienced a bad marriage need to get together and talk about their painful relationships with others. They talk of the lies and deceptions, not out of malice, but just because it helps. They wish their ex-spouse no ill will, coming to an acceptance of their differences and knowing that a separation was best. So it is with our recovery from the Christian indoctrination that we experience. As pagans, we wish our Christian brethren no ill will and accept their path for them. For some, freeing ourselves from the bondage of fundamentalist and doctrinal upbringing can take years, while for others they may never be able to intellectually break free. Historically, our plight is marked by years of torture and executions in Europe and the United States. During the burning times in Europe, an estimated 9 million, mostly women, I don't have this in my talk, but I was just reading the other night, that spanned four centuries, were condemned as witches by the Holy Christian Church and consequently tortured, abused, and executed. Some argued that it was a convenient way for the church to acquire property of wealthy widows and others. It is true that in 21st century America, we are no longer executed as in Salem. However, we are still affronted by an array of hostilities, fear, and ignorance. While some may balk at the use of such extreme words to describe our experience, many who have been raised Christian find themselves at odds with society at large, or their spouse, or family members and friends. I'll propose two vivid examples of the ignorance of the paganism paranoia: the horrific events of September 11th and the record-selling Harry Potter books and movies. What could these two dissimilar events possibly have in common? The first being Islamic terrorist attack against America, killing thousands of civilians within our country, entering a state of war to this day. And the latter being apparently a harmless fantasy story. In the wake of 9/11, two national Christian fundamentalist leaders blamed the terrorist bombings on an act of God. I almost said God. I have to contain myself. Reverend Jerry Falwell on the Reverend Pat Robertson television station stated that 9/11 was divine justice against a fallen America. He blamed, ready? Of course he's going to blame pagans, homosexuals, and feminists. That's probably pretty much sums up probably the majority of the congregation, one way or the other. That he and other fundamentalists have long preached against. Falwell later apologized, but he already showed his true heart. For two national Christian leaders to say such an appalling statement while thousands of Americans were mourning the loss of their loved ones exposes the ignorance behind this narrow religious mentality. These sentiments were offensive to many Americans, pagans or not. Remember, the same line of reasoning was applied by fundamentalists and evangelicals, I'm going back a ways for you younger people in here, to the AIDS epidemic when it first hit. Among these holier-than-thou Christians was a verdict that their view of the Bible was vilified. They preached that the AIDS epidemic was sent by God to punish the sinful homosexuals. This way of believing was scary back then and still is today. History, as it has said, tends to repeat itself if we forget its lessons. These attitudes, I believe, must not be forgotten. The other example on the latter side is Harry Potter. The Christian backlash against the movie and book speaks of their paranoia against anything that smacks of the occult or witchcraft. When I took my children, who are now grown, beautiful young people, when I took my children to see the movie, a relative who was a non-church-going Christian voiced concern about exposing her children, my nieces, to the sorcery aspects. The cries from Christians of evil and satanic messages went as far as some ministers back then conducting public book burnings. Gee, doesn't that sound a little bit like Hitler? What are these Christians actually afraid of? Is this fantasy series not much different than the classics of magic which older generations grew up with, such as Peter Pan, Wizard of Oz? The classic writer C.S. Lewis, who was a very religious Christian, by the way, in the Chronicles of Narnia, created a world of talking animals and wonders to amuse and magic beyond belief. Are they afraid their children might start getting mail delivered by an owl or somehow learn a cheering charm? Perhaps they're petrified by the thought of America's youth actually thinking for themselves. In our old age, when we turn our reins of power over to this generation and your children, I would much prefer to have inspired, intelligent, well-read Harry Potter fans running this country than the closed-minded religious zealots. Like the majority of pagans, I was born into a Christian home. My upbringing was not only Christian, but I was Roman Catholic. That included 10 years of Catholic schools with daily religious instruction. Those of you raised Catholic know that I have struggled with a double whammy, so to speak. Plus, I just wasn't Catholic, but I was a devout Catholic. As a boy, I kept a prayer diary of my nightly prayers. In 9th grade, I read the entire New Testament cover to cover. How many 9th grade or boys or adults for that matter have read the entire New Testament? Where many parents struggled with their children to attend Sunday church services, I attended church willingly, even riding my bike to daily mass during my summers. Later, as an adult in a Protestant tradition, I even did an altar call. To further illustrate the seriousness of my Christian journey, I had a call to the priesthood from 1st to 7th grade. This calling was explained to me was from God. As a boy, I visited and corresponded with an African missionary, and I was an altar boy. In my 30s, I pursued my early vocation to the Christian ministry and attended a Protestant seminary. This entailed a commitment of leaving my job, going into debt, and living below poverty level. But now, as a pagan, secure in my spiritual path, I can embrace this calling as the same calling, just a different manifestation. Even though some Christians may not want to hear it, I believe that I have tried harder than many Christians at being Christian. Prior to discovering paganism, I also was agnostic for a while. Probably a couple of times. I was mainly disillusioned with the Christian baggage I was carrying and could not rationally accept so much of the religion as it was taught to me. It's interesting to realize that for some it's harder to deal with me now as a professing pagan than when I was an agnostic. My guess is, it's only my guess, is that agnosticism is not perceived as challenging to Christians as paganism. As an agnostic basically believes, I don't know, or I don't care. How threatening is that to a Christian? Maybe for these Christians it's easier, for these Christians, not all Christians, for these Christians it's easier to coexist with someone who believes in nothing as they see it than with someone who is perceived to be in opposition to what one holds to be the only truth. We pagans have something to hang around our necks, be it in place of the crucifix, be it the pentagram, the five-pointed star, upright star, that's important, or the ankh, the Egyptian symbol of life, a crystal, or many other spiritual symbols. In contrast to Christians who freely wear a cross without a second thought, if we wear our faith symbols at home or at work, we may be accused of drawing attention to ourselves or throwing our beliefs up in someone's face. The Christian view that theirs is the one, the true, the way excludes us and puts us in opposition with them. They labor under believing that theirs is monopoly of ultimate spiritual truth. We are seen as actively in worshiping their sanctum in our bizarre rituals and beliefs. The Christian's exclusive, dogmatic, The static religion is markedly different than the inclusive, non-dogmatic, evolving spirituality of paganism that I've come to embrace. From Dr. Dusty Zaraga in his wonderful book, Pagans and Christians, The Personal Spiritual Experience, he says, dominant religions have all claimed universal superiority on their part. Pagan religion today is uniquely equipped to appreciate spiritual diversity and common humanity. These words, my friends, impart why I found my spiritual home on these ancient paths. So, why refer to myself as a recovering Christian? My spiritual path, like so many, has been a process of recovering from years of questions and doubts. I believe that it is not so much of being healed, containing myself, or arriving at the end point when one can say recovered, but that I am on a journey. It is in this sense that I am born again and again and again. While many live in ignorance of who we are, others live with an irrational fear. I am ever cognizant of this religious paranoia. As pagans, as seekers of truth and of divine harmony, and we cannot ignore this reality. This is especially true for those of us who live with the tension intimately when it involves our spouse, our parents, or family, friends, or co-workers. So, what of the alienation we feel from dominant society? In some ways, being pagan is analogous with being homosexual. Christian fundamentalists generally believe that the only true sexual orientation is heterosexual, and that any other sexual expression is either abnormal, wrong, or a sin. Affection between two gay lovers, such as holding hands or kissing in public, as any heterosexual couple, for some, is perceived as a flagrant display of throwing up in their face. So as with gays, we can be tolerated as long as the Christians don't have to be reminded of who we are. Just remain mute and invisible is the message we receive. Similar to the experience of gay people, we, like anybody else, should not have to live in a closet or be something we are not. Yet for many pagans, this and has been and is our experience. When we do reveal our religion, just thinking of those moments when that happened to me. To those in our life, what then? Coming out, as with gay people, can be emotionally draining. Excuse me while I indulge in a little creative imagery. Instead of hopping on our brooms and soaring with the witches, we remain in our acceptable broom closets. Some of you got that. Each time we are open, we take the risk of either losing a friend or alienating a relationship. Our spouse, parents, siblings may turn away from us and say, and I've had this happen to me, why have you turned your backs on us? Why have you turned your back on God? I can personally attest to the pain of being rejected and misunderstood. This is why some go through long periods of secrecy, hiding what they read or how they pray or worship. Back in the day, they hid it so they wouldn't get burned at the stake. But when the word is out, what then? We must be prepared that some people will leave us, some will be afraid of us, believing that we are in the clutches of their Satan. They may even want to keep their children away from us. We may hear some say, "You're going to hell." I see some heads nodding. Others may say, "Well, you are just going through another phase." That one too? Or you'll come to your senses, you'll outgrow it. Geez, I'm 63 years old. In the face of this mentality, let us affirm that our faith is not a quirk, a phase, or a passing whim. It is our path that we must walk. We realize that our belief is as legitimate as theirs. The best way to handle this onslaught of questions from the sincere to the ridiculous is to be prepared. We must do our homework. As pagans, we must be prepared to be accused of any absurd things imagination or Hollywood or Christian theology can muster. In so doing, you may hear, all you read is that pagan stuff, as I did. I still do. However, but she doesn't say that to me.
Thank you.
However, it may be impossible to explain why you read, especially in the beginning, with such zealousness. For me, finding my path within paganism, as it was when I discovered Unitarian Universalism, was like finally coming home. Anybody had that experience when you found this? As a fellow member of a pagan group I was involved with said in their first meeting was like putting on an old comfortable shoe. This coming home feeling was and still is remarkable. So then, what is paganism? Our religious history is not only as viable as those who judge us, but is in fact thousands of years older than Christianity and spans multitudes of cultures and continents. Ours indeed is the old religion. Paganism is truly a worldwide faith perspective. We pagans have a faith and belief in a spiritual universe as manifested through the God and Goddess, Lord and Lady, who are known by many names, that we live, pray, and conduct ritual by. Where much of Christian history is about exclusiveness, proselytizing, and rejection of other religions, our beliefs are about spiritual diversity, inclusiveness, and acceptance. So where do we find our support and strength? There are two basic areas. The first is our personal faith, as with any believing person. We cannot separate our faith from who we are. Our personal religious experience differs from the Christians in some fundamental ways. First, our religion is experiential. Our cathedrals, this is a beautiful, beautiful building with a lot of history, and I love history. But our cathedrals, or places of the sacred, is to be found wherever we are. Thus, pagans are not bound by a written text of others' words, which are thousands of years old. We have no Bible. Instead, we believe divinity is immanent, ever-present, and always accessible. If anything, nature is our Bible. Since we believe that God is ever present, the divine is ever revealing its nature and truth directly to us, we need no clergy, no theologians to decipher the Creator's truths. Ours is indeed a living faith. When I now pray or participate in ritual alone as a solitaire or in community, whether it's my wife or former groups and covens, I am sensing a growing spiritual connectedness. The divine presence is more vivid to me now than all those years I practiced my Christian faith. I am at last home. In this I can truly rejoice and be glad. Indeed, this is a new day which the great mystery has made. I borrowed a few things for those of you with Christian background. Besides our personal devotions and walking our daily path, we may find strength in community. We need not face the religious intolerance alone. Confronting the widespread ignorance with the support of a pagan community is indeed a goddess send, if you will. Yet for some, pagan community is hard or almost foreign concept to embrace. Often pagans find it easier or even necessary to withdraw from an intolerant society and walk a solitary path. Often we do not know where to find others like ourselves. When we find the websites or the study groups or organizations and covens and churches such as Unitarian Universalism, we emerge from our solitary paths and share our common spiritual journey and struggle. So my path has involved letting go of the pain of many years of internal struggle. It is in this sense that I am recovering. Breaking free of my narrow Christian upbringing is a peaceful place to be. My spiritual path as a born-again pagan affirms a process. In Native American spirituality, it's referred to as the Red Road. It is a journey of achieving deeper spiritual harmony, receptive to an ever-present and divergent divine truths. I quote again from Pagans and Christians. In the final analysis, the value of spiritual practice is determined by how well it brings us into a better relationship with what is highest and most sacred. So in conclusion, I believe as earth, creation-centered individuals, as pagans, as those who walk the path of the ancient ones, that we must confront the ongoing indifference and religious intolerance around us. This is not always possible nor wise, but we must do so not only for our own spiritual, emotional, or intellectual integrity, but also for the young and old struggling as we have had to do. If we accept this task, we need not do so alone. In community, be it a study group, a UU church that offers us sanctuary, may we find strength and support to walk our divergent spiritual paths. Our paths may indeed be less traveled, but are no less beautiful. So let us end with this thought. Spirit's manifestations are a kaleidoscope of beauty emanating from its source, the Great Spirit, that underlies all things. As the chant sung in UU churches goes, we are an old people, we are a new people. We are the same people, deeper than before. So I thank each of you for sharing this message and this sacred time. Blessed be.
Blessed be.